So before we dive into the conversation for tonight, um, I'd like to take a moment to address the very particular time we are in. Um, and here's what I have to say. So on March 17th, a white man, Robert Aaron Long, drove to three massage parlors across Atlanta and killed 8 people with a gun. Sun Chung Park, Hyun Jung Grant, Sun Cha Kim, Young A Yu, Delana Ashley Yarn, Chung Xiaojie, Feng Daoyo, Paul Andre Michels, and Elcius R. Hernandez Ortiz. It was a premeditated act of anti Asian violence. 6 of these 8 people were working class Asian women, some of whom were sex workers. We must honor and mourn them as human beings who had full and rich lives. Wingspace has released a statement against anti Asian violence that I encourage you to read on our website and social media accounts on Facebook and Instagram. But right now, I'm not speaking as a member of Wingspace. I'm not even speaking as a theater artist. I'm speaking as an individual. I offer you this from my own reflections and learning. Justice is a daily way of being, a conscious series of actions, and not an isolated task. It is a constant recalibration in order to best serve the collective's present needs. And it is a deeply personal lesson that starts with the self. To my beautiful Asian American Pacific Islander friends, colleagues, and community, I say, you deserve to be heard. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to feel safe. And you deserve to receive public support and care from a community and world that benefits greatly from your presence, talents, stories, and labor. In my moments of deep grief and anger the past 2 weeks, I found the courage to speak for my younger self who once thought silence was the only option. I fight for those who do not yet know the power of their voice and for those who do not have the opportunity to use it. I cannot do this alone. We cannot do this alone. To our allies, accomplices, and co-conspirators, especially the white folks, your work is vital to our health and it must be sustained. Please educate yourselves on how to show up for the AAPI community and then do it. Take action. Privilege does not have to be a source of shame and guilt that keeps one stuck in inaction. Privilege can be a source of agency that empowers us to embody our values. I will end with a quote from Mia Mingus, a queer Korean writer, educator, and trainer for transformative justice and disability justice. She says, every day is another chance to practice living out the values that matter most to us, to be our best selves, to be the legacy we want to leave. Thank you. And now I'm going to pass it on to Ellie to read the Syndicate's land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Mel. So I think I'm hoping that based on Mel's invitation, we can do an extra moment of self-reflection, just figure out how your body's doing. And if you need to adjust your body in any way to feel better, maybe take a second to do that, to be present. I know we're in the boxes, but try to bring your awareness there. I'm gonna read this acknowledgement. Let's take a deep breath together. Bring your awareness to your physical relationship to Earth. We acknowledge that the land on which many of us are currently located is occupied territory. It is the traditional land and ancestral home to Native American, Indigenous, and First Nations peoples. We acknowledge that the United States of America was established by some of our ancestors on a foundation of theft, genocide, and enslavement, and remains rooted in anti-Indigenous and anti-Black cultures, policies, and systems. We acknowledge that the technology and equipment that enables many of us to do our work, such as the access to high-speed internet and Zoom, is disproportionately unavailable to Indigenous people and Black people, among other groups, and that the use of these and other technologies contributes to climate change, which also has a disproportionate impact on communities of color. We acknowledge the suffering endured from the cruelty of continued colonization, violence, and oppression of people of color throughout the world on many other occupied lands and territories besides the United States. These histories are ours. They benefit those of us who are white people and inform our present-day context on a fundamental level. In particular, in this moment, we acknowledge the white supremacist violence against Asian, Asian American, and Pacific Islander people in the United States, including the murders of 6 women of Asian descent in Atlanta. We acknowledge these murders as the result of the intersection of racist violence, gender-based violence, violence against sex workers, and the culture of colonialism and imperialism in the United States. We acknowledge that all of these things are connected and that it is up to each of us to strive to be in right relationship to ourselves, to the land, and to each other. Let's take a breath together with these acknowledgements. So I would again just invite you to be in your body for a moment, even longer than a breath. And if you haven't already done so and you'd like to acknowledge the land you're on in the chat, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ellie. I love that so much. All right. So now we get to our conversation, and I'm just so stoked and really honored. I feel like we've just got like this powerhouse guest, I don't know, celebrity list tonight. And I'm really excited to hear what they have to share and the knowledge that they're going to pass on to us. And yeah, this is the time where I invite all of them to introduce themselves. So I'm going to ask each of you guests, Ellie included, and Ellie will be moderating the conversation here forth, to share your name, your pronouns if you would like, where you're calling in from, and then also how you come to this work, where you identify yourself in the arts, but also specifically with thinking about this anti-capitalist conversation we're about to engage with. So yeah, I guess I'm gonna pass it to someone and then we'll just pass it. So Nati.
Hello, I'm first, okay. Hi everyone, I'm Nati, she, her, ella, us. I'm on Nipmuc land in Western Massachusetts. I'm originally from Staten Island, New York, Lenape land. See a lot of new faces. I'm new to the Wingspace community and the Syndicate. I was invited by a comrade, Rad, who's an incredible theater worker. Really excited to be in this community of theater workers tonight. I do not come from this world. I used to call myself a creator for creators. I was an artist manager, worked in the music business, in the live music realm, mostly with artists from the global South and immigrant artists in the US. And I experienced how incredibly extractive and machista and toxic the music industry was it was in my early 20s for about a decade. Luckily, my partner happens to be a heterodox economist, my best friend, my partner, and he really helped me process what I was seeing. in the music business in this body. I was working with artists that were signed to major labels. I was in some of these rooms. I was a renegade publicist. I was pitching artists to Coachella, and then, you know, the artists were playing the large festivals and then not able to pay their rent that month. You know, so I was literally experiencing the economy from as a, you know, in the belly of the beast. That led me to, I'm an organizer now with the New Economy Coalition. It's a network of 200 organizations building the solidarity economy movement, which I'll get into more later, but definitely post-capitalist solutions that are ancestral, that is not new, that we have been practicing, worker ownership, how we rematriate the land and put it into community ownership. And I'm really at this intersection of like, what does that have to do with artists? And how do we not just have the artists come in and do the beautiful work and the beautiful poster and the banner, but really how do we show and unveil the history of how artists have been the original gig workers and have been so creative in figuring out how to survive. And so I just put out a report with the artist Caroline Willard called Solidarity, Not Charity, that seeks to unveil these histories of how artists have been practicing these post-capitalist solutions and not just resisting, which is very important right now, but also really building this new world, you know, through starting artist-owned enterprises, by taking land off the speculative market, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll get into all of that later, hopefully. And I'm also a mother, so I see that as a artistic practice. And I'm also a member of Women of Color in the Arts, which is an incredible organization. If anyone here identifies as a woman of color or an arts administrator, it's an incredible group. And yeah, I think that's, yeah, my parents are immigrants from Cuba and Colombia and benefited from low public college CUNY when CUNY was very affordable in the early 70s before that changed. And you know, that's just a little bit of my background, and I'm really excited to be here with you all tonight. Shall I pass? Okay, I'll pass it to Jenny.
Hi, everybody. My name's Jenny Romaine. I'm just going to do something here where I have a little bit of a different view. I am Jenny Romaine. Hello. I am so excited to be here. I use she, her pronouns. I am a puppeteer. I am in Lenape, Hokkien right now. I'm in Manhattan, Chinatown, and I'm sort of an anchor. The theater company we co-founded in the early 90s is called Great Small Works, and our mission is to create work of great artistic quality, but also to keep theater at the heart of social life. And because we come from a visual theater tradition and puppetry, we understand theater to be many things. So it can be what happens in a theater, it can be what happens on the street, it can be as small as what will fit on your dining room table, it can be have 10,000 people in it, and that it's really kin with what some people call folklore, but I would call like custom rooted performance. And we're really interested in all the places where performance and aesthetics happen. And so we partner with a lot of artists from different traditions, because we have, you know, the more you meet people who feel the same, like when you meet your carnival kin, or you meet your, you know, your people where you have this thing in common. This is incredible opportunities to build. And I also do a lot of work coming out of my own heritage. I'm of East European Jewish descent, but I was blessed to work in a sound archive, a very beautiful immigrant archive called the Yiddischer Wissenschaftlicher Institute, YIVO. And it was a refugee organization. It had been started in Eastern Europe by radical sociologists and folklorists who believed that Jews, as a disenfranchised working class population, could build power. Not just, they were engaged in political struggle, revolutionary struggle, but one of the greatest assets people had was culture. The way they talked, the way they blessed things, the way they walked together, that all of this stuff is actually power. And so even though some of them were socialists and were like, didn't believe in any of this stuff, they defended, the records of super Hasidic communities and all this stuff as if it was the fragments of the treasure from which this new kind of power, identity, indigeneity could emerge. So anyway, I was blessed as a young person. I got to work in the sound archive. So I spent like 13 years listening to the sounds of this. And it's liturgical music and theater music and what they call field recordings, which is like stuff that, people sort of, where they sing in their homes and different kinds of places, and spoken word. Anyway, and I was just surrounded by a lot of very interesting, very mixed people. So I got to get a sense of this world in all its diversity and was sort of raised to not be a hater. Like, put it this way, difference was not something that was supposed to freak you out. It's like, especially in this scene, I'll just mention this because it was a survivor setting. It was like there was a patient on the operating table, and that was this Yiddish culture that had just been like massively destroyed. And everybody was there to pitch in and do their bit. So there was Russian astrologers, there were, Hasidic secretaries from Brooklyn, there were, journalists who had like done incredible, brave recording in Europe. I just mentioned this. Oh, and that the person who collected the trash, this is what I want to mention in terms of capitalism. The person who was the person who collected the trash in the building, whose name was Bullock Ellenbogen, had been a leader of the resistance movement in Europe, in Warsaw. So whenever he walked into the room, everybody stood up. So imagine working in a nonprofit where the person who empties your trash bin is actually the most revered leader in the place, and everyone stands up and gets quiet when Bullock comes into the room. So I was blessed to be in this environment. And I was also raised by people for whom political activism was very as natural as, drinking water and eating food. So I grew up in an activist environment. And thank you for listening to that. And now I will pass to Regina.
Hey everybody, my name is Regina Victor. I use they, them pronouns. I'm calling in from Chicago, which is unceded Anishinaabe land, land of the Three Fires, Council of Three Fires. I'm really excited to be here. You'll see me taking notes because I'm neurodivergent. So if I'm looking away, it's not about anybody and what you're saying. So I'm gonna look at those, and that way we can be expedient, that'd be good. But I am a director, a dramaturg, performer, and a few other hats as well. I come to this work really as an artistic director. I'm 6 months into my tenure at Sideshow Theater Company here in Chicago. So there's a lot of, I always say I've talked a lot of stuff and now I'm trying to back it all up, we're in that crucible moment, it's real cute. But exploring a lot of mutual aid opportunities for the company. I'm really interested in how we can have a more reciprocal relationship with our communities and how everything that we do can impact, assist, uplift something or someone. I also am the founder of Rescripted. I'm a theater critic. I've written for American Theater, Playbill, and HowlRound as well. And I'm on the National Advisory Council at HowlRound, and I'm on the board of the Sappho Project. And I am a member of the Beehive Dramaturgy Collective. So a lot of different hats, a lot of different spaces, and therefore I always try to come to spaces and learn and discuss things. And I'm very grateful to be here. I think that's it. I would love to pass to Shey.
Thank you, Regina. Hi, everyone. I'm Shey Rivera Ríos. I am originally born and raised in Boriquén, the settlement of Puerto Rico, the oldest colony of the United States of America, Turtle Island. And I've been living for the past 10 years in Narragansett land in Providence. Wow, so I'm an interdisciplinary artist, theater maker, performance art installation. Honestly, at this point, all of us are interdisciplinary and just put some things in our hands or in our bodies and we'll just make magic. I vibe with that. I think where my heart of creativity comes from is really looking at the power of art and culture to heal through storytelling and to really combat systems of oppression by creating the spaces for us to come together as communities to imagine new worlds. So I come from the land where the montes sweat and birth streams that keep the land cool, the land where mangoes can grow bigger than your face, where avocado trees birth so hard when the hurricanes come. I am a child of informal farmers, people of the land, jibaros from the montes, so I'm a rural kid now living in New England. What am I doing? My parents are beautiful people. They are caretakers of other species, and I've learned so much from them. Yeah, and I'm really interested of this idea of art and culture at the intersection of urban planning and community development. I saw the report that Nati has created with a lot of collaborators, and that's where my heart lives. I'm interested in being in this space to think about how do we create these alternative systems that respond and create space to imagine based on ancestral practice. You know, so I identify as queer, I'm non-binary, that informs my lens as well. Yeah, I don't know. Let's see, what else? I think that's it. Thank you, everyone. I'll pass it to, who do I pass it to?
You can pass to me. Hi.
Ellenor.
Hi, everyone. I will be lightly moderating our lovely guests this evening. I'm Ellenor Riley-Condit, she, her, hers, calling in from the land colonially known as Chicago, Council of Three Fires, Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi. I am the co-artistic director of the Syndicate, and Mel, who is a member of both the Syndicate and Wingspace, and I collaborated on figuring out how to use this platform to talk about some of the things that are important to us right now, and wanted to gather a group of people around that. And I was so thrilled that all of these really cool people also wanted to talk about these things. So thank you all so much for being here and for being interested in talking with me. The Syndicate is a network of theater makers that are doing tons of different things. So, you know, a lot of us come from backgrounds of performance, design, directing, writing, all of these things. But many of us are also now in a place, especially after this past year and change, where I think, Shey, as you said, we're all interdisciplinary now, right? We're trying to make the world that we want to make, and that is becoming more apparent how uncompromising we have to be in our values and in the way that we approach our art making or whatever industry or ways of being we're engaged in. So the idea for this conversation started with a project that the Syndicate is working on called A Day's Work. And A Day's Work is the result of conversations about exactly the topic of this conversation, which is how do we make an artistic experience, artistic relationships that aren't defined by capitalism extracting labor from people and giving nothing back. So A Day's Work pays people $200 for one day of their work to do it however they want to do it. And we have had tons of different submissions. We're up to over 30 people participating so far. And just before we really dig into this topic a little bit more, I was wondering, Kate, if you would be willing to share this entry that we got for A Day's Work from our collaborator, Roz. So Kate, do you mind pulling that up for us?
jacket and hit a solo one time. We too loud in public, them police turned down the function. Now we outside and the time is perfect. Forgot to tell you, gotta tell you how much I vibe with you. And we don't gotta be solo.
We are gathered here today to celebrate the death of my artistic practice. What you see before you are the only portions of my practice that are salvageable. My words and my body moving from a place of joy. No radical concept, no target audience, no masking my imperfections. Just pure, joyous generation in my tiny space. When I was first invited to participate in this project, I was excited. Then excitement turned to dread. And then dread met my depression and opened the door to my shadow. I had to come clean. I hate what my practice became. What once was a young artist generating from a place of fearlessness, pleasure, and curiosity was now a young adult artist whose professional experiences caused them to edit away the parts of them that made being an artist worthwhile. I stopped making work that I wanted to make. I became focused on pumping out work that I knew my mentors would want to see, or do things that they didn't think I could possibly accomplish without them. I made from spite. I used my talents to become a tool of the for-profit professional theater machine. I feared that if I dared to make work that rejected the white gaze, I wouldn't be able to survive. So I killed my voice and allowed my toxic and abusive theater experiences to develop a practice of self-betrayal. My process was not sustainable. So, with this video, I'm ending its life and putting it in the ground. We're starting over now, with the sway of my Black disabled body, with the honesty of my words. Let me burst into flames and dust the ash off of my process to reveal my inner child artist. Let the laughter of my inner child artist act as joyous feet dancing on the grave of my practice. May my voice never be silenced by fear. May my talents never be used for evil. May I trust that I am enough. Let the absence of the process I once knew make space for the process yet to come.
Thanks, Kate. So, and thank you to Roz. I'm not sure if they were able to be here tonight, but thank you to Roz for always being so willing to have their work shared far and wide, even outside the context of the website for a day's work. So I just wanted to share that because that's where I'm coming to this conversation from, is inviting people to participate in the day's work project and then curating how it is that People are being displayed on our website that collects all of these entries. And I started to just think really deeply with other members of the syndicate about, hearing from so many artists, especially in this time of isolation, that we're really at the point where we know we're not getting what we need out of the structures and systems that this world has mired us in. And the solutions to these challenges need to come from, if we're going to fix the theater industry, it's not just going to come from within the theater industry, right? We're talking about like needing broad coalitions of organizers and activists and people who are thinking about new economies and who are thinking about all of the things that this group is collectively thinking about in order to remake. So I guess I just want to start by seeing if anyone will jump in on the question of how you in particular are feeling your practice or your desires or your community even coming up against the system of extractive labor that is capitalism, and how you're navigating that.
I can start. I'm not a theater arts worker, but as someone who's an organizer who's been screaming at the top of her lungs sometimes to her artist peers about capitalism and systems change work, and I see a lot of friends who are still in the rat race of, at least in the music world, getting chosen by Spotify to get featured or paying exorbitant amounts of money to hire the right publicist so that they're able to find the right gatekeeper. And I could say in this moment in the last year, I think because of COVID, I've just seen possibilities really open in a lot of ways. We've never seen, not everyone, but a lot of people got 3 checks in the last year. So there's the government is in a new place for a lot of people. There's an example for people of how government can be good, maybe not for everyone. There is a movement happening right now to fund excluded workers, so that's a thing. But I'm just seeing an explosion of artist-led popular education happening. I'm just so excited even to get invited to, a conversation like this, or even seeing in the world of solidarity economy organizing, folks really asking, where do artists and culture bearers fit for real? And, one example I can give is 2 weeks ago, there's a group that just formed called Anti-Capitalism for Artists. And it launched, it's an inclusive popular education platform. And I was just so psyched to see this. It's like something that I've wanted maybe for like the last 6 years, and like it's just starting to happen. And they had incredible talks, and they do incredible offerings. And in one of the presentations, there was a theater worker actually who works with the group Workers Arts Project, so folks should check that out, in Chicago as well. And he was doing a teaching on systems and capitalism and union history in the craft. And it just occurred to me, like, of course, like theater people should be doing popular education for the public about this stuff. At one point in the conversation, he does this incredible monologue about the history of trade unions in the last 100 years in theater. And at one point he's going through, Marxist, means of production, all of this stuff, but like so engaging. And my partner is an economist, and I have to hear him do this stuff all the time. And we were both like, it both clicked for us watching him, like, yes, of course, like it should be the theater workers that should be doing this kind of work, And at one point he has us all, he goes, repeat after me. I am an artist and I create value. And we all are like, I am an artist and I create value. So what I'm just seeing as an organizer, as someone who's kind of felt a little lonely sometimes in this work, is that more and more artists are taking this up and wanting to educate themselves for real about systems change, for real around how we go beyond resisting. And, you know, I just participated in a MoMA Divest call, the Museum of Modern Art. And like, you know, it's not just, they're literally saying, we can't just go to the lobby anymore, guys. Like, what else can we do? and they're looking, you know, I was invited, you know, because of new economy work and solidarity content, like, we got to look at these land solutions. We got to look at what a government, a people run museum would actually be like, where we actually decided. So that's just from my perspective right now in this moment in the last year. I'm just seeing an explosion, even this conversation. And I think, yeah, I think what it's building towards is a revolutionary culture, you know, that I think will inspire many more masses of people to get involved.
I feel like I'm also so glad you brought up anti-capitalism for artists, because I'm really excited about that and that partnership. And I feel like we need more of that. You're right, like more education on things, because I feel like the thread that I would pull actually over the past few years is the Literary Managers and Dramaturgs Association started to put together resources for self-advocacy for pay. And that journey from seeing that in like 2019 to now, and the way that I'm talking about work and the way that I'm trying to advocate for work, like even doing something as simple as breaking down your stipend to like an hourly situation, like I've started to be a lot more comfortable sending back like, hey, did you know this breakdown is $2 an hour? And I'm asking you actually for $10 an hour, which is really lowballing myself. And you should really reconsider. Like I think more people are getting comfortable on the micro level, asserting just like equal pay across the board. But I think that, you know, it's going to take, I think, an actual seismic shift. We published an essay on Rescripted that was all about sort of the federal, it's called The American Theater Was Not Built for Us. And it was all about how these models started in this very capitalist place. And it goes through sort of the creation of the Theater Communications Group, of the Federal Theater Project, of, you know, the Ford Foundation, and how these sort of theaters were self-selected. And many of the ones who benefited from the sort of federal overturning of like, we're going to give some theaters some money, and then we're not going to give these other theaters some money, and they'll have to depend on box office sales from there on out to get this grant, but then to keep surviving. And thank you. And a lot of those are still standing. Like a lot of them are American Conservatory Theater, right? A lot of the big theaters that we know now. And so I think the model that we've come in on is actually just flawed in terms of nonprofit. Like even looking at Rescripted, I was like, I don't know that nonprofit business structure, not the concept of it, actually serves the people within it, because it creates sort of a volunteerism culture versus the idea of profit being shaped towards like who's benefiting. You know, I mean, Rescripted just switched from an angel funded model to a community funded model. But I was like, because everyone was like, don't do that. You know, if people don't think you should exist anymore, they're going to stop paying for it and it shouldn't exist. And I was like, okay. Like, I don't know how, if no one's reading it, why am I doing it? Like, I just couldn't make the leap of why that didn't make sense. And it took me a long time, but I'm glad that I did it. So that's sort of from my framework, how things have been shifting.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me. So many aspects of what you shared, Regina and Nati. So I'm just gonna like speak from my own experience. So I worked in a nonprofit, an arts culture nonprofit for 8 years. I used to work in Puerto Rico. Had my day jobs doing admin stuff, but on the side would book. I've been in bands for years too. That's another thing. But I would book shows for musicians, all the way from small bar shows to large scale amphitheater shows, oftentimes entirely underpaid, and just doing labor to support the communities to have access to venues and negotiate relationships, because oftentimes venue owners had really negative stereotypes about musicians. So that was like my start. But then I moved to Providence. I worked at ACE 220 for 8 years, started from the bottom up, part-time admin. Because I was skilled, I raised pretty quickly. And then, the last 3 of those 8 years, I became a co-director. I succeeded the founder. And I was the first person of color to be, director on that level of a white founded organization, and that had a lot of trouble, that had a lot of issues. And it just speaks to what you shared, Regina, of all the issues with the nonprofit sector. Thankfully, AS 220, and I think a lot of people thrown into the vortex of the pandemic, and the fact that all our systems are failing, I think also the racial reckoning of this country has forced people to really look at what they do and how they contribute to systems of oppression, and how those systems of oppression really, it's almost like, ink being injected into plants, that it changes the roots of the organization entirely. And, so I've been watching a lot of artists get burned out, quit jobs that they absolutely do not like, just that question of like, everything sucks. So why should I continue accepting awful working conditions when I can just, either throw it out there and try to figure it out, or create space to heal, or just find the confidence to understand that we do have value. Like you were saying, Nati, like we bring so much value to our communities, our cities. So I've been engaged on a path. I had transitioned out of AS 220. I got a swanky job at MIT, and I was there for a year, and it really burned me out, and I was entirely disconnected from my local community. So I quit. That was my anti-capitalist moment. I'm like, I'm done, like I'm an artist. That is like my first and foremost thing, my most important things, and like getting regrounded to my heart and root is the fact that I am a creative being. And I deserve love and respect. And I also really need to be in relationship with my community, because all of my creative work is nurtured by the networks and the people, the conversations, the vulnerabilities, the exchange, the tumbling down, and doing movement together, whatever it is. That's really what fuels us. And I think, I've been seeing a lot of artists too go on that tip last year, especially, which is really interesting to me. We faced a pandemic, but I think it was a moment of reckoning for some folks where it was a recalibration. Certainly for me, I was like, I don't want this anymore. What I need to do is understand that I have my own value, and that I can figure out how to ground it and sharpen it to make a living. So I've become pretty passionate about the idea of the creative workforce and how to do it in ways that actually create ownership for art workers, and to combat those systems that exploit our labor when we're doing so much, especially queer, trans, and BIPOC artists. Like all these institutions, they entirely underpay artists, entirely, in so many ways, and sometimes it's out of ignorance because they don't know. Sometimes it's just because nobody has pushed them. I don't know. But, a lot of criticism around the nonprofit industrial complex, right? But I'm really interested in what folks are doing when they're like convening, whether it's worker-owned co-ops, like just creating other systems. I've been learning a lot from First Peoples Fund, who I'm supporting now with some communication strategies. And they're an organization in South Dakota that are doing incredible things for years, including like, getting their young people, to start saving money and creating a match so that, the organization also supports them generating income. And I don't know, I think that my hope is that we can, and there has been a long history, right? Like Nati said, of all these systems of solidarity, of ways of building healthy economies that actually are based on ancestral practices. And I'm really interested in that. And the video that Ellenor shared, that really resonated with me. And I'm thinking, for me, that reflection of like, I want to kill my practices relates to, I want to kill to how I relate to making money. Like, I want to kill all these expectations of how, as an artist, I need to be making money. What do I bring that is of value? Navigating the space where it's like, a lot of people say like, you have to be palatable to white institutions and white foundations and all that shit. And it's like, no, not really. There are alternatives because we come with abundance. So it's a matter of like figuring that out. That conversation is hard. It's like there's a lot of financial trauma that folks, are dealing with. I acknowledge my privilege where I had like an administrative position for many years that allowed me an ease with money, but it's still hard because it's a psychological and emotional thing, like to figure out how to charge people, what to charge, and also to understand what is the emotional and spiritual labor you're doing for a specific project. And something that's frustrating, and I wonder if, I'm so interested in learning, Jenny, from you more. Like when you approach this work as, because we don't just produce events, we don't just produce theater, we don't just put like objects on walls, like we are doing cultural and spiritual work in our practice. And a lot of places don't understand that. So when they ask you, let's say, the theater comes and like offers me to produce, they're going to produce a piece of mine, it's usually underpaid, and they just don't understand the way that I practice production and creation with other artists is a very collaborative process. And it really is about artist caretaking. It's like I'm engaged in relationship with people that span from like a few months to like 20 years. And cultivating and nurturing relationships of collaboration is really key to make beautiful work together. And that's some, transparent labor that we bring to the table oftentimes and is underpaid. The last thing I'll say, I was like really struck by a day's work initiative. And it really got me thinking, because it's like, you can talk about all these things all day, but to put it into practice and give a space of prototyping was helpful to me. And what I chose was, as a person who's mixed race, Taino, Arawak, West African, Spanish, Portuguese, and came from Puerto Rico, have been shedding my onion layers of figuring out, my relationship to whiteness and trauma in my body. And, finding like family with other Indigenous and Black people in the US, and having the space to learn those journeys, to cry together and see that these are stories that it's all woven in, right? So how I chose was to, I want to be compensated for my mourning. I want to be compensated for mourning my kin and relearning the histories that were taken from us, because we should have been taught from the very beginning, since we were born in these systems, our histories and our truth. So that all to say, like, what does that look like for us to heal and have that actually, build, us having access to the systems that support our healing and our joy and our radical imaginations is something that makes my heart beat. So love hearing what y'all are saying in this space.
Wow. That was awesome. Oh my gosh. Well, maybe I will, fantastic placement. Maybe I could just share some anecdotes, which is the thing about people have said so much. Maybe I could just respond to share a couple examples of stuff that I've been a part of that have been maybe tranifested, femifested, or manifested, some of the things that have been mentioned. One of them was a solidarity economy project called Milk Not Jails. And it was a radical geography-based project in New York State, largely built on the work of Ruthie Gilmore and others in Golden Gulag radical geographers. My comrade, Lauren Melodia, was a student of Ruthie Gilmore, and she was like, what's going on in New York State? Corrections budget is out of control, enormous, racist, messing up families, destroying everything. Upstate, the farmers are producing milk. New York is like number 3 in milk production in the United States. The farmers can't sell their milk. They're like freaking out. The farm bill, like nothing protects them. And the people downstate are being locked up in the jails upstate. So it's like, if you look at it as a regional issue, the motto of Milk Nut Jails was, we'd rather drink your milk than go to your jails. And so what emerged was a worker co-op and a political organization that said, we're going to bypass the electeds, because every time anything ends up in Albany, the upstate people say, I can't lose one corrections job. And so it's like, okay, they're stuck in an economic paradigm. So how can we, using what we have, build something different? So downstate, those of us who were abolitionists and artists did a huge amount of educating around like what's going on with the prison economy in New York State and what's going on with dairy. Now, I know a lot of people have issues with dairy, but we went to it because it was a lot of what was happening with the land use in New York State. So we partnered with farmers, did a lot of reaching out, whatever, and figured out like, what do you need? We need access to markets. We're busy, we're underfunded. We cannot find these New York people to sell to. Incarcerated people are like, we need change at the state level around what's happening to our loved ones and the way we're being policed and what's happening to us. We will get you markets downstate, and we will build markets for you farmers if you will stand up for us with your electeds when it comes to dealing with some of this analysis and these legal things that we need to get past. Like, you have to put pressure on your electeds to say like, yo, we have an alternative model. So what we did was, for about 5 years, was build a network of farmers and folks downstate, people with incarcerated loved ones, formerly incarcerated people, and created a business called Milk Nut Jails. We had a dairy delivery truck. It was staffed completely by past incarcerated people. And the others of us who participated would do the outreach. And as an artist, my role in this enterprise was to, whenever you encountered Milk Nut Jails, it was like a rockabilly, shimmering dairy dream. And so we would come in and we would do a whole PowerPoint about, PowerPoint made of cardboard, just paintings, talking about like the nature of economics in New York State and the prison economy and why Milk Nut Jails. And we would eat ice cream and like have beautiful things. And I spent like 5 years wearing outrageous outfits and like going to CSAs where we were trying to establish a dairy share, a milk share, and like having my friends who were exquisite xylophone players like play dairy smooth music as we, serve this like incredible stuff to get people to like think about prisons. And then we would do these events. It was kind of a dream. It was kind of a dream, Nati. You would have loved this. This is really your jam, I think. So we would do these ice cream socials where we would have games, like one of them was called Pop the Prison. Oh, and we would do them everywhere and get people signed up in neighborhoods, at block parties, at museums, at like everywhere. And we built this freaking enormous distribution network for dairy. And so all these farmers were getting traction downstate and supported living situations and food pantries. And it was quite something. And there were several people employed. However, it was too much at one time. And I guess maybe this is what my lesson that I've been learning is, it was so ambitious, it was bonkers, and it was successful. Like, you can look it up and whatever, all kinds of amazing things. And as an artist, it was completely fulfilling because anything that I could imagine doing, I could do. So if I wanted to do a magic act, that explained why so many people, whatever, I just got to do anything I could dream of. And also was working with all these formerly incarcerated people who were also incredibly creative, who would then feed into the artistry and what everything looked like and what it sounded like. And so we were getting these blends of like made in America, it was just so many influences. It was very rich. The business aspect, we needed to have a a plant that did the processing of the dairy. Like we ran into some problems on the actual production end, but also it was kind of a re-entry program, an economic collective, a business, you know, like it was so many things, actually dealing with the dairy, like there you are with all this yogurt all the time, you know what I mean? So it was like the actual real stuff. And it was too many things at once. So I guess one of my lessons that I learned is like, we all learned a ton, great things happened. But the people got burnt out because they were taking on too much. So I guess for me, the lesson is, how do we, or the question is balancing, and this is, I don't want to talk too much, but can I share another little example without talking too much? You can be honest with me, Ellenor. Okay, this is another thing about how do we do this ambitious thing where we want to bring all of our solidarity economy values into something, but we do it too much, too fast, and we burn out. So like another project I work on is this giant Purim spiel. There's a holiday in the Jewish calendar that's the carnival holiday. And it's based on this time of year. It's when winter's turning into spring. It just happened. You know, it's the same time as like Nowruz and Holi. It's like one of those transition holiday times. And everything, you know, it's topsy-turvy. And you retell the book of Esther. Anyway, it's traditionally this terrible book in the Apocrypha that's like where everyone's horrible. Anyway, the custom is to do a big community play or a pageant where everything is transgressive and bad is good and you're like taking the piss out of everybody. Happens in ultra-Orthodox communities, happens with communists, happens, it's like a thing on the calendar. So we decided that we were going to use our Purim process as an abolitionist hangout where people from all different places who are normally segregated from each other could have an excuse to just hang out and get totally wacky, like to the point where, you know, that thing that happens, like you were talking about tumbling around with other people's bodies. It's like doing open work, completely linked to movement organizing with organizers, diverse group of people, elders, kids, you name it. We fed everybody. Everybody got metros, you know, got their stuff paid for, their childcare paid for. We tried to create an environment where we could, in a way we can't, hang out together and be creative. And it was so intense what we were doing. Like it was also very trans-led. There was a huge participation of sex workers, and there was live music. And we were also trying to deal with racism within our Jewish community. So it was like bringing in Jews from all different traditions and learning different languages. It was a school, amazing thing. But it was too much to ask this group of artists to do all of this. Like we were also creating the art, which is groovy. And we had, you know, this collectively run studio, all this kind of stuff. But what happened was we were trying to do so much experimental stuff, we couldn't support it. And it really messed up the group. I feel like the group crumbled from the stress of that. So I apologize for talking too much, but I just wanted to put out 2 different examples. And now I'd be quiet.
I'd like to add something really quick, just like those are great examples. So like the way that I've been thinking about my work is exactly like that triangle, right? We're artists, but we're like often, well, many of us, you know, not everyone is involved in policy, whether it's like popular education or processes like you were talking about, Jenny, and or community organizing. And then the other piece is economic development, right? Which is like what Nathy's been, you know, really zoning in on. Like we're involved, we touch those 3. And that's when I talk, when I hear like the value that we bring as artists is like all that work, you know, like, for example, like people in Puerto Rico, so many artists, queer, trans, are organizing, femmes, women have been organizing around food justice, like doing farming work, you know, occupying spaces, pushing the cities to be like, don't leave these abandoned buildings like acquire these abandoned buildings so they become property of the city, so then folks can, you know, have access to them to be used for community purposes. So all these things, you know, and it's like compensated labor, but in the long run, it's labor that generates like higher quality living or more opportunities in different ways. And a question for that is like that question, like, is it sustainable? Like, can we do those things in a sustainable way? I've been thinking really closely about that, precisely because having been an arts manager who was massively burned out and affected too by this like, you know, white messiah complex that some nonprofits are wired in, that it's like, you have to work till you bleed, otherwise like you're not doing enough. And it's like actually not real and not healthy. But, you know, can we, you know, I think about time. When we talk about capitalism, we need to talk about time, right? And the value we put in time. And it's like, we need to stretch it out, man. Like, we can't be doing short bursts of like high energy stuff. We need to stretch this out. And then the beautiful thing about learning from community organizers and mutual aid folks and stuff is like thinking that we can maybe do a short burst now, but then lay back. And then like Regina covers for me when I need rest. And then Regina steps where Regina's like, fuck the system. Then I'm all right, it's turn. So like alternating all of us seeing ourselves as part of the system where we can hold each other up and rest when we need, knowing that our people have got our backs. And I think, you know, about folks talking about community care, when this whole thing about self-care started, you know, people were debating what that meant, but then the idea of community care, that, I mean, that term is new to me, but to me, it's more like the systems we build, you know, as Black, Indigenous people of color and queer people, when we're building and making our own family systems and our own concentric circles of folks to share resources and to keep each other safe. Like that's kind of like a response. It's like, it's really hard. I'm an Aries. I'm like really guilty of this shit. Like A personality, I have work trauma where I feel like my value is related to the work that I do. So I'm like healing that and being like, it's okay to spend, you know, 2 hours playing video games and it's all right. But, you know, like just stretching that out so that we can do work on a more steady basis and have it be compensated properly. Those are things that I'm like really interested in, but then not having to just think the only way to do that is to be hired by a nonprofit or an institution. You know, like, can we create these other systems? Last thing is like the space for artists to be way more participating in community development processes, which like is probably not new to most of us in this room, but like the role as artists as facilitators, caretakers of community space. You know, like Jenny, you were saying like perfect activation of using art to hold space to move policy, but it's like being paid to do that work, you know, because like cities and institutions are paying so much money to people who do not have racial justice, gender justice training at all, and don't even know how to create welcoming space so that our residents can feel welcome and know that their lived experience matters in these processes. So I've been thinking a lot about that. That's what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Shey. I'm just jumping in because about time, what you said about time, I think that is the most critical thing for me in this process of trying to journey towards anti-capitalism, because the thing that capitalism loves to drain from us and is the most critical thing is imagination. Like none of us have lived in an anti-capitalist society yet. And so like we need the time to actually imagine what that can look like. And that has been the hardest thing for me to find. I actually am like weeks, I hope they're not watching this, and weeks over deadline on a HowlRound piece that is about devising the future of time, because I do not have time to sit and imagine how I would like to spend my time. And it has put me in the craziest vortex like ever. But I think it's a really good example of like where we've been and where we're going and what it takes to get there. Like a lot of the things that drive us, or at least things that I hear my peers cite and that I cite, things like Octavia Butler, you know, is a grounding, a ground place of a foundation, a grounding, a foundation of all of our work, a lot of around anti-capitalism, around what it would mean to be in a liberated pro-Black society, comes from Parable of the Sower. So I just think that, like, if we had the time to imagine that space the way that some of these authors that inform our work have been able to do, that's the thing that I think is necessary, is to pay people not just for like when I'm performing, when I'm rehearsing, but when I'm mourning. I love that you said that earlier, Shey. Like, there's so much about our work that is ephemeral, that is incalculable, that is holding space, that is monitoring space, and trying to communicate that and make that tangible has really been where my mind has been. But even that feels like I'm trying to communicate value because I'm still feeding into a capitalist society. So that's what I mean by, what does it mean to actually break out of that?
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of I'm like pulling the thread of for all of you, ownership and self-ownership and community ownership. And I think that's part of the reason I also wanted to share Roz's video at the beginning, is because and I think this is worth mentioning as many times as I get a chance to, it's when we're talking about capitalism, we are also necessarily in this colonized country talking about racial capitalism. And we're talking about how people are feeling that, you know, a lot of art spaces are experiencing a lot of art spaces as owned by whiteness and as reproducing the values of whiteness, even when they are inviting folks of color in. And I think that something that I'm hoping you all will keep picking up a thread on is how we cultivate the self-ownership and the small group ownership to then keep going out and out and out, right? Our art, our labor, our joy doesn't belong to, you know, whatever institution. It belongs to us. And how do we keep making the platforms for that to feel possible? Because it does, burnout is real, right? It does, it gets us sometimes, right? So how do we maintain that container of ownership is something that I'm thinking about, if anybody wants to pick up that thread.
I actually would love to share a video that we made on this topic, which I sent to, I think, someone who can screen share it. And just to give some context, Shey mentioned it earlier. It's a report for arts funders, which I was already like, should I do this? This is not my jam. I've never done this before. It's not my dream to write a report for arts funders. But speaking to how the year has changed, right? Like even within the world of arts philanthropy, there are change agents who are challenging it in major ways. And that's something that I had to be challenged on, because I think I maybe had done a broad brushstroke, like abolish it all needs to go. But there's some really inspiring folks within arts philanthropy that are really calling it out and calling it in and calling it up. And the grant makers in the arts, which is the National Association of Public and Private Arts Funders. So it's all the big guys, but then it's also the small municipal funders too. Like my hometown in Staten Island's arts grant maker is a member of this grant makers in the arts. So it was an opportunity. The RFP was like, we want to learn about new and alternative economies. And we're like, oh, okay, okay. So Caroline and I were like, all right, let's actually use this as an opportunity to talk to solidarity economy scholars like Dr. Jessica Gordon Nemhard, who wrote like the history on African American cooperative thought. Let's talk to artists, organizers who are doing resist work right now. So like the Union for Musicians and Allied Workers who are organizing against Spotify. Let's also talk to some of these, grant makers who've been like really calling to task the entire field. And let's just bring these, we called it a brain trust. Let's like talk to you 70 plus people and figure this out and do this collaborative report on how do we actually, if y'all are really saying you want to invest in new and alternative economies, I mean, I'm under no illusion that most will listen or many, but they asked for it. So let's produce this report, and let's also maybe make a video for our peers who are artists and because the solidarity economy world has been a little bit behind in being able to make videos and make content and make the language accessible. As a comms person, there's so many names for this stuff. There's like economic democracy, new economies, regenerative economies, beloved community, helping one another. There's a lot of language out there that's very confusing. Democratic socialism, and they're not all the same. There are some differences, but it's all going towards the same place. So we use the opportunity to make also materials for people like you all and organizers of like just making the case. So I thought I would share the video if that's okay. It's 4 minutes long, and I would love like reactions, and maybe this can be kind of a springboard because it's all about ownership and it's all about time and it's all about like, how do we do this? So I think I sent it to Kate, so thanks.
What would a cultural economy be like if it loved Black and Indigenous people? All around the country, the people who have been most harmed by our current systems are practicing self-determination and community wealth. The movement for permanently affordable space in Oakland places culture at the center of the work. The first democratically managed investment fund in the country, making non-extractive loans to community members, says cultural workers are economy builders. Culture bearers lead the oldest native co-op in the country. Artists started the oldest non-extractive venture capital firm in the US, a co-op giving 35,000 freelancers the benefit of full-time employment was founded by artists. Black Lives Matter was co-founded by an artist. This work is not new. Creatives are going back to the future, to practices of shared livelihoods rooted in cultural traditions. Why should culture and economic innovation go together? Because right now, we have a superstar system where the winners take all and the rest are left with crumbs. Because just like art, housing and dignified work are human rights. Artists are the original gig workers. Culture making and political organizing go hand in hand. We want a world where everyone's needs are met so everyone can participate in the remaking of culture and society. An artist living in a community land trust in New York City will have 27 hours a week to make art, compared to an artist in market-priced housing who will have 4 hours a week for art making. We must repair centuries of injustice. What do mutual aid networks, worker co-ops, community land trust, participatory budgeting, and time banks have in common? Community ownership and democratic governance that builds political, cultural, and economic power. When these hyperlocal initiatives get together, they have enormous power. This emergent movement goes by many names. But internationally, it's known as the social and solidarity economy, or solidarity economy for short. It provides resilience against crisis and has lasting impact when supported as a holistic system. To support this work, you can educate yourself, join existing organizing work, and advocate for economic justice. Organize a book club in your community. Read the book Collective Courage. Study toward action. Find your local credit union, worker co-op, or time bank and join it. Make media about this work, songs, posters, memes, and stories. Make gifts and loans of time, art, and money to seed these groups. Follow the lead of grassroots organizers and commit to long-term support. Advocate for legal and fiscal policies that enable the solidarity economy to thrive. The people who have been most harmed are creating community-controlled, hyper-local economies that are resilient amidst crisis. The systems that artists want are not only possible, they already exist and can be strengthened and cultivated with intention. Learn more. Art cultivating.coop.
So I just like, we already wrote it in a script here. I want to shout out, actually relevant to this group is Reg Flowers, who did the voice. Reg is a theater worker, theater of the oppressed practitioner. And I met them, they did a play called Black Conference, which was an immersive play. It happened at a public school in Brooklyn. You walk into the school and the actors are acting all around you. It's like you're going to this Black conference that takes place in the 1930s. And it was inspired by Jessica Gordon Nemhard's book, Collective Courage, which chronicles the history of African-American cooperative thought. And so you have all the great civil rights folks kind of acting around you, talking about, co-op history. And then at the end of the play, the FBI come in and shutter you out, and you have to leave the school, and that's the end of the play. And the theater, the actors were so inspired because we're not taught this. Like, it's such a history that is repressed, that most of our civil rights leaders and icons were either socialists or we're definitely talking about cooperative economics. And so the theater folks wanted to start their own co-op after this experience, after learning this history. And so they tried to start a co-op, and it failed because of lack of funding. And, I hope with this report that, I don't think it's the solution that a bunch of philanthropy is going to fund this stuff, but at least they can be jumpstarting this stuff. And in the transition, I think funneling some of this, money into, what you were saying, Jenny, like where it could have had more of an infrastructure of these projects and support, and actually give these funders some, some language and some history and context. So Reg is an incredible person to connect with in Black Conference. And we also spoke to Double Edge Theater in Ashfield for the report, so I'm sure folks are familiar. And Anassa Troutman in Memphis, who is trying to kick off a multi-stakeholder theater co-op in Memphis, called the Claiborne Temple. And that's in the process of getting built. So those are kind of 3 theater folks that were involved in this project that I can share more if anyone's interested.
It really struck me, the 27 hours versus 4 hours, right? I think that we all felt that, and anyone who makes any kind of art, I think we can all like feel that in our souls. And yeah, I'm wondering what else any other folks picked up on, just things that stood out to you.
That was the one for me. I clutched my chest and I was like upset about it. And I think that's okay. I mean, that's, it's provocative. It's very good. But I mean, that disparity of time, just because we were just talking about it, really, and I can see why it made you think of that, is really scary to me, because I think going back to those ideas of ownership and who owns something, and why I think the fact that we're talking about co-ops and community work now is great, is because I think that what happened to a lot of people is they realized how many other people owned them or owned their time. And that's not really very different to me, if someone has ownership over your time, your body, what have you. And I think that given the specific intersections of what was happening last year, especially with George Floyd, and especially, with everything that was going on in Breonna Taylor, like folks were like, my body is mine. I don't want to give it to you. And even now, one of the things I'm most excited about is like the boundaries coming out of this, even though we're going back into this sort of intense capitalist world, that we've all gotten a lot better at saying, no, I don't think that's actually for me. Yeah, I'd love to hear other people's thoughts, because it's still fresh for me. Can we maybe talk about like community ownership? Because I feel like that's something that I haven't been as well versed in, and like community care. Like, I would just love to hear a little bit about that work too, and how it intersects with y'all.
I don't have too much experience, but the models I've seen, and probably Nati can speak more to this, like I've been really interested in like the community land trust models, but I haven't, been fully engaged in that. I know that definitely like some of the main models that have informed work in the US have come from Puerto Rico, actually, Huelcaño, Martín Peña. And I know folks in the South Bronx have been organizing too. So I really, love this idea that we should, take that land, right? I think now that you mentioned it, like take it out of the market and just like turn it into community assets. Like that's a thing. The time banking also strikes me. And I never had thought about it until like I read that report, actually. I was like, oh, holy shit. Like I've done Skillshare exchanges with other artists to like maximize, our own practice and get access to other kinds of projects. But I never, I didn't know about time banking per se. So I'm just like really interested in how other folks have practiced that. There was one more. Oh, I am running a project that I can't fully talk about right now, but it really is, it is in collaboration with the city of Providence and local organizers. And it is to, the city did announce that they're doing an analysis of the public safety budget. And, a group of us were contracted to create a body of work that could help support some community forums after, because myself and colleague Vadik Kumba, he's an incredible organizer and artist too, theater maker. We started doing community forums last year. So this all to say that he talks about this framework called the spectrum from community engagement to community ownership. And it's like an actual like matrix that tells you all these processes where community is being tokenized, but then how to get to what does it actually look like for a community to be owners of the process and stakeholders. And, in my work at AS220, it was really interesting. I learned along the way, but, a lot of people think it's a collective. It's not a collective. It's very much like a structured organization, an institution. But, what would it look like if just full buildings were owned by, workers, instead of them being held by an LLC that's held by a nonprofit? Can we, create more opportunities for artists to own their spaces, especially people who often get kicked out, who are often living in really unsafe and unhealthy environments and are often lose their homes after, 20 years or whatever. So I don't know, thinking about the time banking, I'm really interested in too.
Could you say a little bit more about what time banking actually is, just for those of us who are new to the idea?
Nati, would you like to speak to that one? Not to put you on the spot, but you're probably gonna.
Yeah, I mean, it's not to be over complicated, because it can even be as something as much as like with your neighbor, you're keeping track of time that you may give. You might provide a service in exchange for something that you need. There's something also called offers and needs markets that we could even do today as a group if we wanted, where we could, at the end of this call for 15 minutes, we could have a row that said offers and a row that says needs, and folks put what they can offer and folks put what they can need, and literally we would just be in that practice together. But there are a few examples around the country of more official time banks that have actual software. There is kind of a whole, this stuff is not fully developed. So I don't mean to put, a link to all these examples and say like, this is what's happening and this is all that's happening and this is a silver bullet even, because there's a lot of major roadblocks that some of these orgs are even up against, whether it's capital, not having enough money to finance this stuff, some of the legal structures that are really limiting. One of NEC's members is the Sustainable Economies Law Center, and they're a bunch of renegade lawyers in California in California, you don't have to go to law school to become a lawyer. So there's this troop of lawyers that are doing co-op law together and really trying to break down the legal profession and figure out how to do policy work within California right now, but I hope eventually in all of the states, to help some of these formations form legally easier, because it's very difficult right now. So for time banking, for example, something I can name is that there are 2 different softwares and the founders are each kind of beefing with each other about the, who gets to license out this software versus Black and Brown communities that have been doing time banking and don't even freaking use the software really. So that's just kind of one small example of how it's not so neat and black and white. But Cola Nut Collaborative, that is one of the examples, is in Chicago, and they're operating a time bank in their community, and they're able to kind of log hours of what, maybe somebody needs gardening work. So you log a few hours for gardening work in exchange for, you need help getting your groceries, for example, and you can kind of barter in that way. So there are a few examples. There's Cola Nut Collaborative for BIPOC examples. Cola Nut Collaborative is a great example. Cowrie Collective in St. Louis is an incredible example. And I would also argue that I think like our people already kind of do it also. And I would like to see, though, in the next 100 years, like an open source time banking software that anyone can use and access, but we're not there yet.
Thank you for that. Sorry, because I was definitely like, that sounds really cool. And I think you're right. We are kind of doing it in some spaces, because these, like even Cole and I, I'm like, oh, that's what they do. That is what it is. That makes so much sense. But I'm like, oh yeah, exchange. It's just an exchange, and I love that we're kind of formalizing and ascribing. And I also think it's so interesting that like some of the hiccups are like, how do we get this to be legally simpler? Like, how do we essentially cheat this capitalist system to make this thing work? And that's where I keep being like, we're in this transition. You said that earlier, and it's sticking with me about like foundations should be able to help us through this transition, but like, it's probably not going to look anything like where we are now. It's just exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing about that is like, how do we build a container so those processes can be like actually successful? Because we need to be in relationship with each other, and oftentimes those systems fail because we don't know how to be in relationship with each other. So like, just thinking about that, some folks are really just doing a lot of facilitation work and like, sharpening their skill sets, doing reflective practice to help other folks be in these committees or groups or co-ops, hold that space, because it is totally a space of culture building. And, I think like, I'm working with an environmental justice nonprofit group called One Square World, and their thing is like collaborative governance. So really creating systems where like the residents are the ones informing the decisions and impacting policy. So something that struck me, I was like at the beginning, I love their work. We had a really great conversation because I was like, but how do you do that? Like, how do you actually build, coming from spaces as an artist, right? Spaces where usually they're horizontal or vertical or diagonal, whatever the hell, they're everywhere. But like, how do you actually create horizontal structure that actually succeed, where people are in relationship with each other, responsibilities are split, and people feel excited and encouraged to bring their skills to hold those containers together. Because also like, we are shedding our own skins of capitalism, and we have expectations. And then, inequity does happen when we're in space together and somebody doesn't hold their end of the bargain, then somebody else carrying the extra weight, usually femmes. So like, just, things I've been thinking about, like, how can we create those containers together? There should be more energy put into supporting folks who can support other people to create those structures. That's something that I think we will need.
If y'all are okay with it, we're getting some questions in the chat, and I think people are just excited to chime in. Is it all right if we open it up and see what else folks are wondering about? Cool.
Oh, okay. So I see in the chat about the Illinois law, the worker co-op law. That's funny. Actually, an organizer who participates in my partner's workshops was part of the coalition that passed this. And I think it's just part of the work that has to happen. Like, this isn't a federal thing. It's very local to Illinois, and each state and municipality has different laws that make it either easy or very difficult to form as a worker co-op. So I don't know the details exactly of this particular law, although I know that folks worked really hard on it. And some of NEC's New Economy Coalition's strategy in the next 10 years is how do we strengthen some of these regional ecosystems through policy work, culture work, narrative work, just network building, so that there are stronger coalitions. And in Chicago, there is a very strong, strong ecosystem, I must say. There's a group called Chicagoland Regional Cooperative. I can share it in the link in the chat, but there's a really powerful crew in Chicago, I can say, really pushing towards this stuff. But it's not that way in all parts of the country. So yeah, so how do we identify some of those places? And if you're interested, other places where there is strong kind of ecosystems is Western North Carolina, surprisingly, Massachusetts, and New England, Massachusetts area, Oakland, Chicago, where else? Portland, Seattle area, but yeah, St. Louis, Buffalo. Yes, I forgot Buffalo. So that's what I think about that. I don't know all the details of it, but I know that there are coalitions working really hard on the ground trying to change laws, and it's a struggle. And I shared a true gift in the chat of the Sustainable Economies Law Center did a presentation on how to change the law, and it's really accessible for anyone, of like how this group of renegade lawyers is actually approaching the legal profession. Because that's a big part of it. And I think also the policy side as well is, I'm not even scratching the surface of that, but as part of the report, we did build with some policy people, and it just really humbled me how much work there is to do on the policy side of this.
I just want to say that we've got about 15-ish minutes left. And so if y'all would like to come back and join us, you can turn your cameras on. And if you have questions, like, feel free to ask them. You can either ask them by unmuting yourself or putting them in the chat, and I can read them out too.
If nobody, I can see also speaking with the okay, quick, just that I'm having a little palpitations as an artist, hearing all this stuff about economics and land ownership and all this kind of stuff. It's like, I fought my whole life to have a practice where I get to make art, and I've sacrificed a lot for that, and it's what keeps me alive. And now I'm being asked to, like, you know, listen to all this policy stuff and whatever. So I guess in my heart of hearts, I mean, I'm being asked because I'm choosing to ask myself, you know, about this transformation, like how we can take small steps to building a balanced move into this, so that, like, our sacred practices of voice and movement and all this kind of stuff do not have to be removed from it. And again, it's a thing about time and how we use our time. And I don't know if anybody else was feeling this, but listening, I'm like, well, where's the art? You know, my life is short, and where can I make the art? And I don't know if other people were having that response.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that, yes, I'm going to loop this all back somehow, but I do think that's really important, because I think that we are very much in a space where it's all going to fall on us administratively to try and figure these things out. And I actually think that it would help us to treat it a little bit like how people of color, specifically Black people, I'll speak from my own experience, are starting to treat racism. I was like, I don't know how to fix it. You made it. I don't know how to undo capitalism because I know how to make art. That's bananas to me. Now, I think that there are people who can wear both hats I think that my job is to say very loudly that that is what I want, and to create worlds that people can see where they can fall in love with the idea of that. But like, I'm just being very real about my skill set. I can get up and talk to a bunch of people, but I'm not necessarily, you know, someone who's going to go and pass the bar and be like doing that kind of amazing work that Nati was talking about, you know? And I think knowing that's the beautiful thing about this time banking, like knowing what you can offer and knowing what is needed. Like, I think finding the people, supporting the people who are doing that can sometimes be more helpful than trying to do it ourselves, if that's not necessarily a lane that we're in. So I also just wanted to offer that to folks. And then just quickly talking about, I'm reopening the chat, but just to talk about the law that passed for cooperative business ownership. I think like many laws, it is just the drop in the bucket of like what is possible. I think the fact that there is a law that is even inspiring a shift of the work does not benefit people who do not do the work. That is really the basis of what that policy does. And the people who are the workers are the people who have predominant voting power, for example, 51% ownership and things like that. And I think that that model and that idea just existing in and around theater, because right now the people who benefit from theater are the patrons, are the donors, are usually the highest level trustees, whereas the artists are there as part of that service rather than the artists being the ones who benefit the most and everyone else getting to come be a part of that. So that's where I think it can help be in line with our values and where we're going.
Thank you, Regina. That makes me feel so much better. No, for real, for real. Yeah, it's so easy to fall into that, you know, that vortex of like, now I have to solve everything because all the systems have failed us. So it's like up to us, but it's like, no, man, like I vibe with what you said. It's like, yes, sorta, maybe we are part of it already. We are doing a lot of change making work. We are being in relationship with each other. Like the fact that, I mean, I just met y'all, like, and we're having this conversation together, and that's a seed and that's a start. And then, you know, you have brilliant minds who are capturing all this stuff like Nati and putting it out. And then the rest of us can create beautiful, magical worlds to help people see it, like Octavia Butler did. I've been thinking a lot about that because I definitely got drowned in it. And I was just like so stressed. And I was like, damn, I left all of my jobs so that I could try to carve out more art space and like heal my body. And now I'm like thinking about, you know, participatory budgeting and abolishing the police and doing all these things. And it's like, but it's all connected, right? To me, and I'll just share the really quick so we can just hear more questions. Like the work of theater and art making and bringing this intimacy and vulnerable space and joy and magic to our communities also gives us the fuel to keep doing that hard work of organizing. So just also like adding to that, like we are part of the puzzle. We are giving inspiration and joy and energy to the folks who need it and to ourselves, right? So we can keep moving forward further.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier, like even Reg's work, just, I don't know, did you see the light in my eye of like being able to go into that school and see that history? Like that work really energized me. And same with the Double Edge Theater. I think they put on a convening every 2 years called Art and Survival that I literally cold emailed, like, can I please come? You know, so I think, yeah, that's why in the video we try to say like, just, you know, you can make media about this, right? It doesn't mean you have to do all the things, but I think just being aware that it's connected is really important. And the ways that you will pass that seed on to others around you is, you know.
Well, and it is a trap of capitalism, right? That some of us, or well, I'll speak from my own experience, being raised in traditional theater training, I was somehow taught that I had to give all of myself to just that, and that somehow activism and organization are separate, right? And as we know, as I know now, right, I have to bring the skills that I have to the revolution, right, which happened to be about facilitation and making art, right? But like that is a myth that we were taught, that all, we can't see how all of these things are related and try to create the time and space to to work with them and on them through our lens, which for me happens to be theater making, for all of us happens to be different types of art. And yeah, I just think that trap is really difficult. And I know there's so many younger people coming up, especially in this education system that we have, and in higher education and in arts education, that are feeling like they have to choose also. And I'm grateful to this group of people for trying to figure out how we can joyfully and buoyantly see all of it and choose our lanes and be constructive with that. So
just super fast, like, because the way I came to that thought feels relevant for this space. Like, first of all, you are good at so many things. Like, it doesn't matter what your discipline is in theater, you are good at so many things because you're still working right now, and you couldn't do the one thing you went to school for if you're still here right now. So I'm just gonna put that out there. But like, I had a moment where I was an associate producer at a company, and the electrician had gotten sick. And I was sitting there and I was trying to hard patch a light board. This is why it's relevant to the space. And I was sitting there and I'm like trying to figure out where the tape goes, and these cords are so big. And finally I was like, Regina, you can teach, you can market, you can act, you can dance, you can sing, you can direct, you can dramaturg. Why the hell do you have to also patch the light board? And that was like how I came to my acceptance of it's okay to be good at this group of things and expect other people to be able to do those things. Just go find them and build support for them. Just like 2 seconds on that.
Actually, one of the most influential things on me in my coming into this work, and I feel like now that I've become super wonky, now I'm nonprofit wonk, damn. But Caroline Willard, who I got to work with now in the last year, but before then I just admired her work. She had this one poster that like broke it down for me, and like I had access to like all these orgs doing all this incredible work around the country, but it didn't really hit me until I saw this poster that she made. That is just a piece of propaganda, and I'm gonna send it to Kate, and maybe Kate can share it. It's just propaganda. It's not like super, artsy, but it just breaks down like all the different, I don't even want to just, I don't know if Kate got it and wants to pull it up. But it's just like in very simple lettering, I think people should be able to make whatever it is that they want, but there are those artists that want to do stuff like this. And I'm telling from my experience, with this poster changed my life. And whenever we post this poster on social media, it's like somebody's just like, so that just makes such a difference. So yeah, it's just so simple, but it made it so clear to me. And there's things missing. There's nothing here about abolition or, indigenous rights, but or many other things. But like, I don't have a boss. I'm a worker owner. I don't have a landlord. I don't pay for school. I participate in self-organized school. I don't hoard my stuff. Just painting the picture of what this ecosystem could look like really influenced me as someone who had never worked, in this space before. So I just wanted to share that.
Are we gonna take questions? No, we're not gonna take questions.
yeah, anybody's free to jump in. I wanted to open it up, but we can keep going like this forever. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, I'm just realizing we're at 9:55, so we have like 5 minutes. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Do people just like, I feel like we have time for like one question?
Yes.
I don't think this is a question, but it's a thought or just a takeaway. I'm really struck, Jenny, by what you brought up of like, wait, but what about just making or like, how do we process all of these huge ideas that already exist out there, that all of you have brought and that I've already been taking in. And I feel like we could have a whole separate conversation, or I would love to have a full separate conversation with all four of you about how these huge ideas manifest in like how we organize, how we act in a rehearsal room, or how we act when we show up to, you know, run errands with someone who we're working in mutual aid with, or like how these big organizational ideas translate. And maybe those are kind of like the indescribable things, but I'm interested in trying to talk about what it means to be anti-capitalist and like how we start a meeting, you know? Yeah. So thank you all. There's just so much. Woof, woof.
I'm getting intel that there is a question from Facebook. And I know we have 3 minutes left. I'm going to ask it though, in case people want to talk about it. And it says, 10 years from now, what does / could a space of community practice look like?
There's a place made of dreams. No, I'm kidding. But there's a place in New York that I love. It's not a theater, but it's run by a mentor and a friend of someone I know. But Jeff Canada's Harlem Children's Zone. It's a free school, and it's like prenatal all the way through college care as well as maternal care. And it is, for me, one of the spaces that when I was coming up, I was like, this is what a theater should do. It should be able to have like that kind of holistic, oh, you need SAT prep. Oh, you need vitamins. Oh, you need to like understand this policy and how it affects your school. Like whatever that may be, that's one of the models that I look to a lot.
Great Small Works, the collective that I'm in, we built a larger renters club called Building Stories, because we'd been displaced so many times. We were holding down a studio space. I mean, we moved 10 times and we're not mimes, you know what I mean? We're freaking sculptors, we're like puppeteers. And so it's like a move is a move. And we just were like, wow, we have to figure out, you know, a different way. So we just asked all of our friends and their friends, like, how much could you pay for rent? And then based on what we could get in a pool of people who are willing to commit to that, we looked for a space with the amount of money that we had. And the amount of time we spend dealing with landlords. So just to answer the question, my dream would be that somehow we're able to make a transition into a land trust. Like we've tried a number of times to cooperate with a church or other people who are losing their, you know, like if we could do that, I feel like so many of the collective processes are, you know, you make the road by walking it. Like there's lots of people you can learn it from. But for me, the biggest hurdle are the implants, like, I mean, inputs, I mean, like real estate. So I would say if that could be like double edge, right? They own their land.
Yeah, Double Edge is a great example. Or I mentioned earlier, my mentor has a community art space in Sacramento, struggled a lot for 10 years, was burnt down one time, and they were able to do a community purchase of their building. So yeah, I think of spaces like that as community care, and not siloing these things, you know, art practice and, you know, needing shelter and food. Yeah.
I think universal healthcare, like good healthcare, crazy, like, you know, because like so many people too, like can't do what they need to do in the world because they can't take the risk of being freelance, you know?
Yeah.
And disability justice, I think if at least we had universal healthcare, that would be a giant step up so people can move toward living the lives that they. And also, like, fuck the healthcare system. Are you kidding me? Like, health insurance, like, that is the biggest BS ever. Like, is that a mafia? Like, are you kidding me? If you're gonna go and pay for healthcare, and if it's not Obamacare, it costs like I did calculations. It costs $700 a month or like $9,000 a year to like have good healthcare. Who can afford it? I'll shut up.
Yeah, there's a group of fighting for like a what works progress administration now, like WPA now is the hashtag if you're interested. It's like the FDR program in the 30s that employed thousands of artists. There was problems with it too, but that's something that maybe, you know, was going to my earlier comment, the first thing I said around like expectations around government. Like we have a culture that was really against government for the last 40 years, which was like really planned, right? They've been planning this kind of neoliberal takeover since the 1940s. So how do we actually put faith into that, like government can be for good? We can hire artists, we can maybe do basic income in some way, or job guarantees for artists and care workers and all of that. So yeah, there's a lot. This could go on for days.
Thank you all so much. Yeah, we're a little like 2 minutes past time, and
I turn into a pumpkin.
on our talking about time, I just want to be respectful and mindful of your time. And so close out the conversation, but really so special to have you all with us tonight. I've learned so much. It's really been a gift. It's just so much wisdom, so many resources, so many things that have been shared. And I'm just like so glad that we could make this happen with all of you, Shey, Regina, Jenny, Nati, Ellie. So yeah, thank you to you all. Thank you to the Salons committee and I just want to shout out to Christine, Kate, Edward, EL, Kate Pitt, well, 2 Kates, and Tanya for being here tonight to support us from Wingspace. And also the Syndicate folks, lovely to see you. I feel like there's more stuff I should be saying, but what I'm just gonna quickly say is please check out Wingspace. You can sign up for our mailing list on our website. Upcoming salons can be seen on our website, on our mailing list. And with the Syndicate too, please check us out. We are thesyndicate.com. And you can keep following our Day's Work project and the other things that we're up to.
Yeah, please go look at a day's work. There's so many. I wish that we could just sit here and watch everybody's entries, because it's all the result of the stuff that we're talking about. It's people trying to live that. And yeah, thank you all so much for talking.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for the invite. Thank you, everybody. Hope to be in contact.
100%.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Stay safe.